She's basically a free servant, my husband Robert said to his poker buddies, his voice carrying through our thin kitchen wall. If it wasn't for that, I would have divorced her years ago. I stood frozen behind the door, a tray of sandwiches trembling in my hands. 5 years of sacrifice, 5 years of believing I was being a good wife, reduced, free, damn servant. I walked straight to our bedroom, opened his laptop, and started taking screenshots of everything I could find. What happened next changed everything. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because you're about to witness the most satisfying revenge story you've ever heard. Let me back up. My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 58, and until that moment, I thought I was living a life of noble sacrifice. 5 years ago, my husband Robert was in a car accident that left him with limited mobility and chronic pain. The doctors said he'd regained about 70% of his function, but he still struggled with walking long distances and needed help with many daily tasks. Or so I believed. I reduced my work hours as an art teacher to care for him, eventually quitting altogether when he convinced me he needed full-time support. I became his driver, his scheduler, his personal assistant, and his emotional punching bag. "Maggie, this coffee tastes awful," he'd yell from the living room every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. Not, "Good morning," not, "Thank you for making me coffee," just complaints, always complaints. The doctors had said his physical limitations were real, but that he could push through much of the pain and disability with effort. Robert claimed the doctors didn't understand his condition. "They see me for 20 minutes every few months," he'd say. "You live with this every day. You know how much I'm really suffering." And I believed him. When he said he couldn't walk to the mailbox, I walked to the mailbox. When he said lifting anything over 10 pounds was agony, I did all the lifting. When he said the pain made it impossible to focus on household tasks, I took over everything. I told myself I was being a good wife, in sickness and in health, right? What a damn joke that turned out to be. The funny thing about being someone's caregiver is that you become invisible. I was there to serve, not to be seen or heard. Robert's friends would come over every Friday for poker, and they'd talk about me like I was furniture. "Your wife's been really dedicated through all this," one would say. "Yeah, she's got her hands full," Robert would reply with a smirk. "But someone's got to do it, right?" They'd laugh while I served them drinks and cleaned up their messes. The casual dismissal was almost worse than outright insults. Our 2 kids, Sarah, 38, and Michael, 35, rarely visited because Robert had convinced them I was overprotective and made him seem more disabled than he really was. When they did show up, they'd criticize me for babying him. "Dad seems frustrated, Mom. Maybe you should encourage him to do more for himself. Are you sure he needs this much help? He looks stronger than you make him sound." I'd try to explain that Robert had bad days and good days, that his pain levels fluctuated, that the doctors said he needed assistance. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. They thought I was exaggerating his limitations to make myself feel needed. The cruel irony? They were right, but not the way they thought. Robert controlled every aspect of our lives from his position as the disabled husband. Where we went, what we watched, who we talked to, how we spent our money. He'd review our bank statements and question every purchase. $20 at the grocery store for flowers? What are we, millionaires? You bought the expensive dish soap again. I can't work anymore, Maggie. We need to be careful with money. Meanwhile, Robert ordered premium beer for his poker nights and expensive supplements that might help his condition. I started buying the cheapest everything, clothes from thrift stores, generic food, bargain shampoo. Meanwhile, Robert's medical expenses seemed to keep growing. But the worst part wasn't the criticism or the isolation or even the thankless work. The worst part was that I'd started to doubt my own perceptions. When I'd suggest Robert seemed stronger than usual, he'd accuse me of minimizing his suffering. When I'd mentioned that other people with similar injuries seemed more mobile, he'd say I was comparing apples to oranges. Every injury is different. Maggie, just because someone else recovered better doesn't mean I'm faking. He was so convincing that I started wondering if I was the problem. Maybe I was too demanding. Maybe I didn't understand chronic pain. Maybe I was being selfish for wanting him to try harder, until I heard those words through the kitchen wall. Free servant. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every interaction, every moment over the past 5 years, seeing it all through new eyes. Had he always seen me this way? Had I really thrown away my career and my independence for someone who saw me as nothing more than unpaid help? I got up and went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was tired, gray, invisible. When had I stopped mattering completely? That's when I decided to find out exactly what kind of man I'd been serving. And trust me, what I discovered made those poker night comments sound like compliments. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked through Robert's phone while he was sleeping, and holy crap, was that an eye-opener. Text messages to his friends, all complaining about me. Maggie's being dramatic about my pain again. The wife thinks she knows better than the doctors. Sometimes I wonder if she enjoys playing nurse. But the really damaging stuff was in his email. Robert had been corresponding with other men in online support groups for accident victims, and his stories didn't match the reality I'd been living. To them, he described himself as mostly recovered, but dealing with an overbearing wife who infantilized him and refused to let him do things for himself. My wife acts like I'm completely helpless, he'd written. She's created this whole identity around being my caregiver and gets upset when I try to be independent. I screenshot everything, my hands shaking with rage and confusion. Then I found the dating app. Robert had a profile on a site for people seeking casual connections. His profile described him as recently divorced and rediscovering my independence after a controlling marriage. The photos were recent, him looking healthy and mobile, even one where he was clearly standing without assistance for an extended period. But wait, it gets better. I decided to dig through our financial records more carefully. Turns out, Robert had been moving money to a separate account for the past 2 years. Not large amounts that would trigger questions, but steady transfers that had drained our joint savings from $20,000 to $3,000. Where was our money going? According to credit card statements I'd never seen, expensive dinners at restaurants during the days when I ran errands, gifts from jewelry stores, and premium subscriptions to dating sites. The jerk was dating while I was at home, managing his medications and doctor's appointments. I sat in our kitchen at 3 a.m., surrounded by printed evidence, and I started laughing. Not happy laughing, that crazy kind of laughing you do when you realize your entire life has been a carefully orchestrated lie. Then I stopped laughing and got strategic. First, I called our insurance company to review Robert's case. The representative was confused when I asked about his current functional status. According to his last evaluation, Mr. Thompson has regained significant mobility. His physical therapy notes show he's capable of independent living with minimal accommodations. I'm sorry. What? When was this evaluation? 6 months ago. He demonstrated full independence in transfers, walking up to half a mile unassisted and lifting moderate weights. I almost dropped the phone. The man I'd been helping to the bathroom could walk half a mile? Has he been attending his physical therapy sessions? He completed the program early. His therapist noted that he was exceeding expectations and ready for discharge. When I hung up, I realized I wasn't dealing with a lazy patient or someone in denial about his recovery. This was calculated deception. That morning, Robert woke up in his usual demanding mood. "Maggie, where's my breakfast? And why is it so cold in here?" I brought him his eggs and toast, same as every morning. But this time, I watched him differently. I noticed how smoothly he transferred from bed to wheelchair, how he moved his legs naturally when he thought I wasn't looking. "Robert," I said carefully, "your physical therapist called yesterday. She said you'd graduated from the program?" His reaction was immediate and telling. Not surprised, not confused, defensive. "Oh, that. Yeah, I finished the basic program, but that doesn't mean I'm cured. I still have limitations, Maggie. You know that. She said you could walk half a mile. On a good day? Maybe. But you see me on my bad days? You know how much I struggle." But his eyes were angry, not frustrated. There's a difference between someone defending their genuine limitations and someone caught in a lie. That afternoon, while Robert was napping, I did something I'd never done before. I hid outside and watched our house. After 20 minutes, Robert appeared at the kitchen window, looked around carefully, then walked normally to the refrigerator. Not the careful, painful movement I was used to seeing. Normal walking. He grabbed a beer, walked to the living room, and put his feet up on the coffee table to watch sports. When I came home an hour later, he was back in his wheelchair, looking tired and pained. "How was your nap?" I asked. "Restless. The pain was really bothering me today." I started keeping a journal of these observations, documenting every time his story didn't match his actions. When Robert's poker buddies came over that Friday, I played the perfect hostess again. But this time, I had my phone recording in my apron pocket. "Your wife's such a saint, Bob," Jack said, "taking care of you like this." "Yeah, well, someone has to. And honestly, she needs to feel useful. Her teaching career wasn't exactly setting the world on fire." The casual cruelty took my breath away. "Lucky she's got a good reason to stay busy," another friend chimed in. Keeps her from nagging you about getting back to normal, right? Exactly. As long as she thinks I need her, she doesn't ask too many questions about what I do with my time. More laughter. I excused myself to the kitchen and threw up in the sink, but I also got it all on recording. That night, after everyone left, I confronted Robert directly for the first time. "I know you can walk better than you pretend," I said. His response was swift and brutal. "Maggie, you're starting to sound paranoid. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should talk to someone about these ideas you're having." "I'm not paranoid. I've seen you." "Seen me what? Having a good day? Pushing through pain?" "Maggie, this is exactly what Dr. Patterson warned me about." "What are you talking about?" "Caregiver syndrome. When people become so invested in someone being sick that they can't accept recovery. He said you might start imagining that I'm better than I am because you're afraid of losing your purpose." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I doubted myself again. But then I remembered the dating profile, the financial records, the recordings. "We need counseling," I said. "I think you need counseling," he replied, "and maybe medication. This paranoid thinking isn't healthy." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to prove exactly who my husband really was, but first, I had to be smarter about it than he was. I knew I needed help, so I did something I should have done years ago. I called my sister Beth in Chicago. "Maggie, I was just thinking about you. How's Robert?" "That's actually why I'm calling. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the dating profile, the financial records, the discrepancies in his mobility. Beth was quiet for a long time. Then, "Oh, honey, I was wondering when you'd figure it out." "What do you mean?" "Last Christmas, when you went to get groceries, Robert walked out to my car to get my suitcase, carried it up the front steps like it was nothing." My heart stopped. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to bring it up. Remember? I said Robert seemed to be doing really well and you got defensive. You said I didn't understand how much he was struggling, that he was just having a good day." I remembered. I'd been so conditioned to protect Robert's narrative that I'd dismissed my own sister's observations. "There's more," Beth continued. "Michael mentioned that Robert drove himself to Michael's work last year when you were visiting me. Michael thought it was weird that Robert made him promise not to tell you." Everything started clicking into place. All the times family members had seemed confused about Robert's limitations. All the comments about how well he looked. All the times I'd defended him against their observations. "Beth, I think I'm in an abusive relationship." "Yeah, honey, I think you are too." That conversation changed everything. Having someone validate my reality after years of being told I was imagining things felt like coming up for air after nearly drowning. I called Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse, and made an appointment for the next week. But Robert, as always, was one step ahead of me. When I told him I'd made a therapy appointment, his response was immediate and strategic. "That's great, Maggie. I'm glad you're getting help for these paranoid thoughts." "It's not paranoia." "Robert, of course not. But a professional can help you understand why you're having these feelings. In fact, I think I should come with you. I'd prefer to go alone. But I'm part of the situation you want to discuss, right? It would be helpful for the therapist to hear both perspectives." The manipulation was masterful. He was positioning himself as the reasonable, concerned husband while making me look like I was hiding something. "Fine," I said. "You can come." Dr. Chen's office was warm and comfortable, with soft lighting and art on the walls. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind but sharp eyes. "So," she said, "what brings you both here?" Robert immediately took control of the narrative. "I'm concerned about my wife," he said, his voice full of caring worry. "Since my accident 5 years ago, she's become my primary caregiver, and I think the stress is affecting her mental health." He went on to describe my increasing paranoia and delusional thinking. He painted himself as a patient, suffering husband whose recovery was being hindered by a wife who needed him to stay sick. "Maggie has started accusing me of faking my disabilities," he said sadly. "She follows me around the house, questions my doctors, and has become convinced that I'm lying about my limitations." Dr. Chen listened carefully, taking notes. Then she turned to me. "Maggie, how do you see the situation?" I started to speak, but Robert interrupted. "Before you answer, honey, remember that we're here to get help. Try to be objective." The implication was clear. Don't trust your own perceptions. But Dr. Chen caught it. "Robert, I'd like to hear from Maggie without input right now." I told my story as clearly as I could. The discrepancies I'd observed, the financial irregularities, the dating profile, the conversations I'd overheard. Robert's response was swift. "Dr. Chen, this is exactly what I'm talking about. She's creating these elaborate scenarios in her head. The dating profile was something I set up but never used. I was just curious about what was out there. The financial stuff is me trying to manage our money responsibly. And as for my mobility, I have good days and bad days. Maggie, Dr. Chen said, do you have any evidence of what you're describing? I showed her some of the screenshots and recordings on my phone. Robert looked genuinely shocked. Maggie, you've been spying on me? Recording my private conversations? This is concerning behavior, he said to Dr. Chen. Paranoia, surveillance, accusations. I think my wife needs serious help. By the end of the session, I felt worse than when I'd arrived. Robert had managed to make me look unstable while positioning himself as the long-suffering victim. But Dr. Chen asked to see me alone the following week. Maggie, she said during our private session, I want you to know that everything you described is consistent with psychological abuse. But Robert seems so reasonable. Abusers often present well in public settings. They're charming, convincing, and skilled at making their victims look unstable. She helped me understand something crucial. What you're experiencing is called DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. He's denying the abuse, attacking your credibility, and positioning himself as the real victim. For the first time in years, someone believed me. But when I got home that day, Robert had a surprise waiting. I called Sarah and Michael, he said. I told them about your paranoid behavior and your therapy. They're coming for dinner this weekend. I think it's time for an intervention. My own children were coming to stage an intervention against me at the request of the man who'd been systematically abusing me, and I realized that Robert wasn't just smart, he was dangerous. The dinner with Sarah and Michael was a masterpiece of manipulation, and I walked right into it. Robert had prepared carefully. When they arrived, he was in obvious pain, moving slowly and looking frail. He'd positioned his wheelchair prominently and had his medications displayed on the kitchen counter. I'm worried about your mother, he told them before I could even serve dinner. She's been acting strange lately, paranoid, aggressive. Sarah and Michael exchanged concerned glances. What do you mean, Dad? Sarah asked. She's been accusing me of faking my disabilities. She follows me around with her phone, recording me. She's convinced I'm having affairs and stealing money. Michael looked at me with disappointment. Mom, is this true? It's more complicated than that. She's even been to therapy, Robert continued. But instead of getting help for her paranoid thoughts, she's trying to get the therapist to believe her delusions. Mom, Sarah said gently, Dad's been through so much, and you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there. I tried to explain about the evidence I'd found, but every time I spoke, I sounded more desperate and unhinged. Robert sat there looking sad and patient, occasionally wincing in pain. The thing is, Michael said, Dad does seem really limited. I mean, look at him. On cue, Robert struggled to reach for his water glass, and Michael immediately jumped up to help him. See, Robert said softly, this is what I deal with every day. But somehow your mother has convinced herself that I'm faking. Maybe, Sarah suggested, Mom needs a break, some time away to get perspective. That's exactly what I was thinking, Robert said. Maybe Maggie could visit Beth for a few weeks, get some distance, some rest. They were plotting to send me away. In my own house, my own family was discussing how to manage my mental health crisis. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. The room fell silent. Robert's mask slipped for just a moment. I saw a flash of anger cross his face before he schooled his expression back to concerned sadness. Of course not, honey, he said. It was just a suggestion. We all want what's best for you. But after Sarah and Michael left that night, Robert dropped the act entirely. That went well, he said, standing up from his wheelchair and walking normally to the kitchen. Nothing like concerned children to keep you in line. I stared at him. You're not even trying to hide it anymore. Why should I? Who's going to believe you? Your own kids think you're having a breakdown. I have evidence. You have recordings of private conversations obtained illegally, and photos that could be explained a dozen different ways. Meanwhile, I have a medical history, documented disabilities, and a wife who's clearly unstable. He was right, and we both knew it. Here's what's going to happen, Robert continued, his voice calm and threatening. You're going to stop this amateur detective bullshit. You're going to go back to taking care of me like a good wife. And if you don't, I'll have you committed. You can't do that, can't I? I have a therapist's notes about your paranoid behavior. I have witnesses to your instability. I have adult children who are concerned about your mental health. He moved closer to me. And for the first time in our marriage, I was actually afraid of him. You created this situation, Maggie. You made yourself indispensable, and then you made yourself crazy. Now you're stuck with both. That night, I lay in bed planning my escape. But every scenario I imagined ended the same way, with Robert convincing everyone that I was the problem. The next morning, I called Dr. Chen for an emergency session. "He's turned my own children against me," I told her, "and he's threatening to have me institutionalized." "Maggie, abusers often escalate when they feel they're losing control. What Robert is doing is classic, isolating you from support systems and using institutional authority to maintain power. What can I do? You need allies. People who will believe you and support you when Robert tries to undermine your credibility. But my own family doesn't believe me. Then we need to find other family. Beth, maybe? Friends? Anyone who might have noticed inconsistencies in Robert's behavior?" I thought about it. Beth had seen Robert walk. My old friend Janet from school had always asked pointed questions about Robert's recovery. Even Robert's poker buddy Jack had seemed uncomfortable with some of the things Robert said about me. "We need to document everything going forward," Dr. Chen continued, "and we need to be strategic. Robert is counting on you to act emotionally and impulsively. We need to be smarter than that." "How?" "By giving him exactly what he expects while building a case he doesn't see coming." That afternoon, I called Beth and asked if I could come for a visit. "Of course," she said immediately. "How long were you thinking?" "A week or two. Robert thinks I need some time away to clear my head." "And what do you think?" "I think I need time away to plan." When I told Robert about the trip, he was smugly satisfied. "Good," he said. "Some distance will help you get perspective on your behavior." What he didn't know was that I'd already researched divorce attorneys online and made an appointment with Patricia Morrison, one of Chicago's top family law specialists. But Robert had one more surprise for me before I left. The night before my trip, I found him on the phone with someone, speaking quietly. "Yes, she's been exhibiting paranoid and aggressive behavior. No, she's refused medication. I think she might be a danger to herself." He was calling in a mental health evaluation request. If I didn't play this perfectly, I wouldn't just lose my marriage, I'd lose my freedom. Beth picked me up at the airport in Chicago, took one look at me and said, "Jesus, Maggie, you look like a ghost." "I feel like one." During the drive to her apartment, I told her about Robert's threat to have me committed, about the dinner with Sarah and Michael, about how thoroughly he'd isolated me. "We're going to fix this," Beth said firmly, "but we're going to be smart about it." Patricia Morrison was everything I'd hoped for in an attorney. Sharp, experienced, and completely unimpressed by sob stories. "Let me see your evidence," she said. I spread out everything I'd collected: bank statements, screenshots, recordings, photos. She reviewed it all carefully. "This is good documentation, but it's not enough for a clean win. Your husband is clever. He's created plausible explanations for most of this. So what do? We need more, and we need it to be legally obtained. These recordings you made without his consent won't be admissible in Illinois." My heart sank. "So I have nothing? You have a starting point, but we need to build a stronger case." She leaned forward. "Tell me about his medical care. Who are his doctors?" I gave her the names of Robert's primary care physician, his physical therapist, and the pain management specialist he saw occasionally. "I'm going to have an investigator pull his actual medical records, with proper subpoenas. If there's a discrepancy between what he's told you and what his doctors have documented, that's fraud." "What about the mental health evaluation he's trying to trigger?" "We're going to beat him to it. I'm going to have you evaluated by a forensic psychologist who specializes in abuse cases. If you're deemed mentally competent, which you will be, it makes his claims look retaliatory." For the first time in months, I felt hope. "But Maggie," Patricia warned, "this is going to get ugly. When abusers realize they're losing control, they escalate. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about going back to that house, to that life, to being Robert's free servant for the rest of my days. "I'm prepared." Dr. Elizabeth Harper was a forensic psychologist with credentials that read like a textbook. She spent 4 hours evaluating me, putting me through psychological tests and detailed interviews. "Mrs. Thompson," she said at the end, "you show no signs of mental illness or instability. Your responses are consistent with someone who has experienced long-term psychological abuse. So I'm not crazy? You're trauma-bonded and gaslit, but you're absolutely not crazy. In fact, your ability to maintain clarity and collect evidence while under sustained psychological pressure suggests remarkable mental strength." Patricia's investigator worked fast. Within 3 days, he'd obtained Robert's complete medical records through proper legal channels. The results were explosive. Robert's physical therapy records showed that he'd regained 85% of his pre-accident mobility within 2 years. His pain management doctor had noted that Robert was possibly exaggerating symptoms for secondary gain. His primary care physician had recommended a return to work 2 years ago. Even better, the investigator found something I hadn't known about. Robert had been secretly collecting disability benefits from his former employer while hiding his recovery. "This is federal fraud," Patricia said when she saw the reports. "He's been stealing money from his insurance company for 3 years. But the real breakthrough came when the investigator did something I never could have. He interviewed Robert's physical therapist directly. Mr. Thompson specifically requested that I not contact his family about his progress," the therapist told the investigator. "He said his wife was overprotective and would interfere with his recovery if she knew how well he was doing." "Did you think that was unusual?" "Very. Most patients want their families to know when they're improving." Mr. Thompson seemed almost anxious to keep his wife from finding out. The pattern was clear and documented. Robert had been deliberately deceiving me about his condition for years. But when I returned home from Chicago, I found that Robert had been busy too. "How was your trip?" he asked when I walked in. He was in his wheelchair, looking frail and concerned. "Did you get some perspective?" "It was helpful," I said carefully. "Good, because while you were gone, I had some conversations with Sarah and Michael. We're all worried about you, Maggie." He handed me a brochure for a mental health facility. "I've arranged for you to have a voluntary evaluation, just a few days to make sure you're okay." "Voluntary?" "Well, it doesn't have to be voluntary. I have documentation of your paranoid behavior, and Dr. Chen has notes about your concerning episodes." I looked at the brochure. The facility was legitimate, but I knew how these things worked. Once you were admitted for evaluation, it could be difficult to get out if someone was claiming you were a danger to yourself or others. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course, but Maggie," his voice turned cold, "the thinking time is limited. You're going to get help, one way or another." That night, I called Patricia Morrison. "He's forcing the issue," I told her. "I think I have maybe a day or two before he has me committed. Then it's time to move. How quickly can you get back to Chicago?" "I don't know. He's watching me carefully now." "Maggie, listen to me. Can you get to the bank tomorrow?" "Maybe." "Why?" "We're going to freeze the joint accounts and file for emergency divorce protection, but you need to be the one to do it first." "What if he's right? What if I am crazy?" "Maggie, crazy people don't ask if they're crazy, and you have a paper trail of evidence that a federal investigator just verified. Trust yourself." The next morning, I told Robert I was going grocery shopping. Instead, I drove to the bank, withdrew half our joint savings, and had the accounts frozen. Then I drove to the courthouse and filed for divorce. By the time Robert realized what had happened, I was already back on a plane to Chicago. But I'd underestimated him one last time. When I landed, I had 17 missed calls and a voicemail that made my blood run cold. "Maggie, you've just proved everything I've been saying about your mental state. You've stolen money, filed false legal documents, and fled the state. Sarah and Michael are devastated. They think you've had a complete breakdown." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Not sad or concerned, but coldly triumphant. "I'm filing a countersuit for elder abuse and mental incompetence. And when I'm done, you'll wish you'd stayed in that nice facility I picked out for you." The war had officially begun. Robert's counterattack was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours of my filing for divorce, he'd painted me as an elder abuser who'd been stealing from a disabled man and covering it up with false accusations. His lawyer was good, really good. They filed an emergency motion claiming I was mentally incompetent and had fraudulently accessed our joint assets while experiencing a psychotic break. The local newspaper ran a story. "Local teacher accused of elder abuse flees state after stealing from disabled husband." Someone, I'm guessing Robert, had leaked selective details that made me look like a monster. Mrs. Thompson allegedly withdrew $15,000 from joint accounts before fleeing to another state, the article read. Her husband, who requires full-time care due to disabilities from a car accident, was left without access to funds for his medical needs. No mention of the dating profiles. No mention of the hidden accounts Robert had been feeding for years. No mention of his actual medical status. Patricia Morrison read the article and shook her head. "He's playing this perfectly, making you look like the aggressor while positioning himself as the victim. So, what do? We hit back with facts. But Maggie, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Are you prepared for a real fight?" I thought about the alternative, going back, apologizing, resuming my role as Robert's servant while everyone believed I'd had a mental breakdown. I'm prepared. The first court hearing was a disaster. Robert showed up in his wheelchair, looking frail and heartbroken. He had character witnesses, neighbors, friends, even our mailman, testifying about what a devoted husband he was and how erratic my behavior had become. Your Honor, his lawyer argued, Mrs. Thompson has demonstrated clear signs of mental instability. She's made wild accusations against her disabled husband, stolen money from their joint accounts, and fled the state when confronted with the need for mental health treatment. I sat there listening to person after person describe me as paranoid, unstable, and potentially dangerous. Robert had clearly spent weeks preparing for this moment. When Patricia Morrison presented our evidence, the medical records, the financial documentation, the proof of Robert's hidden activities, his lawyer had responses ready. Your Honor, Mrs. Thompson obtained these so-called medical records illegally. The financial irregularities she's alleging are normal account management by Mr. Thompson, who was trying to protect their assets from his wife's increasingly reckless spending. And the dating profiles? Mr. Thompson was seeking emotional support online during a difficult period when his wife was becoming increasingly hostile and paranoid. He never met anyone in person and was simply trying to find people who understood what it was like to live with a caregiver who had become abusive. It was brilliant. Robert had an explanation for everything, and it all supported his narrative that I was the problem. The judge was clearly skeptical of my claims. Mrs. Thompson, this court is troubled by your decision to access joint funds and leave the state immediately after your husband expressed concerns about your mental health. Your Honor, I was afraid. Afraid of what? That your disabled husband might overpower you? The sarcasm was devastating. The judge ordered a full psychological evaluation for both of us and froze all assets until the evaluation was complete. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. He's turning this into a credibility contest, Patricia explained, and right now, he's winning. That night, alone in Beth's guest room, I almost called Robert to surrender. The fight seemed impossible. He was too smart, too prepared, too convincing. But then I remembered something Dr. Chen had said. Abusers are only as powerful as their victims allow them to be. The next morning, I did something that terrified me. I called Sarah. Mom, she sounded shocked. Where are you? Dad's been worried sick. Sarah, I need you to listen to me. Really listen, without interrupting. Mom, Dad told us about the money you took, about you running away. Sarah, please, just give me 5 minutes. I told her everything. Not the angry, desperate version I'd tried before, but a calm, factual account. The hidden dating profiles, the financial records, the medical documentation showing Robert's true condition. I can send you proof of everything I'm saying, I finished. There was a long silence. Mom, this is really hard to believe. I know, but will you look at the evidence I send you? Another pause. Okay, I'll look. That afternoon, I emailed Sarah everything. Bank statements, screenshots, medical records, the investigator's report, everything. She called me back 3 hours later, crying. Oh my God, Mom, he's been lying about everything, hasn't he? Yes. I feel so stupid. I should have listened to you. You weren't stupid, honey. He's very convincing. What can I do to help? For the first time in months, I felt like I had an ally. But Robert wasn't done. When he realized Sarah was wavering, he made his most ruthless move yet. He called Child Protective Services and reported that I was an unstable grandmother who posed a potential danger to my grandchildren. Sarah called me in tears. Mom, they're sending someone to interview me about my kids' safety around you. Dad told them you've been having violent episodes. Violent episodes? He said you threw things at him and threatened him with kitchen knives. I felt the last of my naivety die. This wasn't just about divorce or money anymore. Robert was trying to destroy every relationship I had, every connection that might give me strength. Sarah, you know I would never... I know, Mom, I know, but they have to investigate. That's when I realized Robert's strategy. He wasn't just trying to win in court. He was trying to make me give up by making the cost of fighting too high. But Robert had made a crucial mistake. He'd underestimated how much I'd changed during those weeks in Chicago. I wasn't the same woman who'd been his servant for 5 years. I wasn't going to be bullied or manipulated anymore. If Robert wanted a war, he was going to get one. But this time, I was going to fight dirty too. The psychological evaluation took place over 3 days, and I knew everything depended on it. Dr. Amanda Foster was a court-appointed forensic psychologist with 20 years of experience. She was thorough, professional, and completely unimpressed by charm or manipulation. My evaluation came first. 3 hours of psychological testing, detailed interviews about my marriage, and a review of all the evidence I'd collected. Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Foster said at the end of our final session, "Your psychological profile is completely consistent with someone who has experienced sustained emotional abuse. You show no signs of mental illness, paranoid thinking, or instability. What about Robert's claims that I was violent? There's no evidence in your psychological makeup to support claims of violent behavior. In fact, your responses suggest someone who has been systematically victimized by psychological manipulation." Robert's evaluation was a different story. Dr. Foster caught him in multiple lies during their sessions. When she asked him to demonstrate his physical limitations, his performance was inconsistent with his medical records. Mr. Thompson claimed he couldn't walk more than 50 feet without severe pain, she noted in her report. However, surveillance footage from the courthouse parking lot shows him walking normally for over 200 feet to avoid waiting for handicapped parking. She also administered tests designed to detect malingering, faking, or exaggerating symptoms. Mr. Thompson's responses on validity scales suggest deliberate exaggeration of both physical and psychological symptoms, her report stated. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Foster did something unexpected. She interviewed Robert's poker buddies. Jack, the one who'd seemed uncomfortable with Robert's comments about me, finally told the truth. "Bob's been bragging for years about how he's got his wife completely fooled," Jack told Dr. Foster. "He says she thinks he's more disabled than he really is, and he likes it that way because she takes care of everything." Did he ever indicate that he was deliberately exaggerating his limitations? Oh yeah, he called it playing the disability card. He thought it was funny. The other poker players confirmed similar statements. Years of Robert bragging about manipulating me, all documented in official interviews. When Dr. Foster's report was filed with the court, it was devastating for Robert. Mr. Thompson demonstrates a pattern of deliberate deception regarding his functional capabilities, she wrote. His claims of spousal abuse appear to be retaliatory in nature. Mrs. Thompson shows no signs of mental instability and appears to be the victim of sustained psychological abuse. But Robert's lawyer had one more card to play. They filed a motion claiming that Dr. Foster was biased because she specialized in domestic abuse cases and was predisposed to see abuse where none existed. "Your Honor," Robert's attorney argued, "Dr. Foster has made a career out of discovering abuse. She has a financial and professional interest in finding abuse in every case she evaluates. It was a desperate move, but it worked." The judge ordered a second evaluation by a different psychologist. Dr. Michael Stevens was older, more conservative, and initially skeptical of abuse claims. I could tell from our first meeting that he thought I was probably a manipulative woman trying to take advantage of a disabled man. But Dr. Stevens was also thorough and honest. When he reviewed Robert's actual medical records, not the story Robert told, but the documented medical facts, his attitude changed completely. "Mrs. Thompson," he said during our final session, "I owe you an apology. When I first read about this case, I assumed you were exaggerating your claims, but the evidence is overwhelming. What convinced you? Your husband's own medical records. The discrepancy between his actual functional capacity and his reported limitations is so extreme, it can only be deliberate fraud." Dr. Stevens' report was even more damaging than Dr. Foster's. "Mr. Thompson has perpetrated a sophisticated and sustained deception regarding his physical and emotional condition," he wrote. "This appears to be part of a deliberate strategy to maintain psychological control over his wife through learned helplessness and economic dependency." Two independent psychological evaluations, both reaching the same conclusion. Robert was an abuser and I was his victim. But Robert had one final, desperate move. The night before our next court hearing, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, Dad's in the hospital." My heart stopped. "What happened?" "He collapsed at home. He left a note saying the stress of your accusations was causing serious health problems." Even knowing what I knew about Robert, my first instinct was guilt and fear. "Is he okay?" "He's stable." "But Mom, the note mentioned you specifically. He said the pressure from the court case was affecting his heart condition." I realized what Robert was doing. This was his final manipulation, using a fake medical emergency to make me look like the villain who'd driven her poor disabled husband to a health crisis. "Michael, I need you to listen to me very carefully." But it was too late. By the time I got back to Minnesota, the local news was running stories about the disabled veteran hospitalized due to stress from wife's abuse allegations. Robert had managed to turn his own manipulation into one final victory, or so he thought. Because there was one thing Robert didn't know. The hospital had security cameras in the parking lot, and they showed Robert walking normally to his car after his medical emergency, apparently forgetting to maintain his disabled act when he thought no one was watching. The footage also showed him throwing away what appeared to be a pill bottle in the hospital dumpster. When the police retrieved it, they found it was full of over-the-counter sleep aids, not nearly enough to be dangerous, but enough to cause drowsiness and get him admitted for observation. Robert had faked his own medical emergency, and this time he'd finally gone too far. I had everything I needed: the medical records, the financial evidence, Linda's testimony, the insurance investigator's report. Patricia Morrison had filed all the paperwork. The trap was set. All I needed was the perfect moment to spring it. That moment came on a Tuesday morning when Robert woke up with food poisoning. He'd eaten something bad at his poker game the night before, and by 6 a.m. he was genuinely sick. Stomach cramps, nausea, the works. For the first time in years, he actually needed help. "Maggie," he called from the bedroom, his voice weak and desperate. "Maggie, I need help. I think I'm really sick." I could hear him retching in the bathroom, completely miserable. The old me would have rushed to help, would have spent the day taking care of him, bringing him water and soup and clean clothes. Instead, I walked calmly to our bedroom and stood in the doorway. Robert was sitting on the edge of the bed in his underwear, looking genuinely awful. For a moment, he almost looked like the helpless man I'd been caring for all these years. "Thank God you're here," he said weakly. "I need help getting cleaned up. I think I had an accident." I looked at this man who'd called me a free servant, who'd stolen our money while I sacrificed everything, who'd been dating other women while I changed his sheets. I walked to the dresser, pulled out a fresh adult diaper, and tossed it onto the bed beside him. "You said I'm just a free servant," I said calmly. "Here's your diaper. Good luck." Robert stared at me in shock. "Maggie, what are you talking about? I'm sick. I need help." "You've needed a lot of things over the years, Robert, but you've never needed me." I turned and walked toward the door, where my suitcase was already packed and waiting. "Where are you going?" he called after me, panic creeping into his voice. "To live my life." "You can't just leave me like this. I'm disabled." I paused in the doorway and looked back at him one last time. "No, Robert, you're not." As I drove away from that house, I could hear him yelling my name from the bedroom window. But for the first time in 5 years, I didn't look back. Within an hour, I was on a plane to Chicago. By that afternoon, Patricia Morrison was serving Robert with divorce papers and a restraining order. But that was just the beginning. While Robert was dealing with his food poisoning and trying to figure out where I'd gone, the insurance investigator was executing search warrants for his financial records. Linda, his girlfriend who thought he was divorced, was being interviewed by federal investigators about the fraud case. His medical records were being subpoenaed by the court. His poker buddies were being asked to testify about his bragging. By the time Robert realized what was happening, it was too late. The perfect servant had become the perfect prosecutor, and I was just getting started. The call came that evening while I was having dinner with Beth and Patricia. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Martinez with the fraud unit. We've arrested your husband on charges of insurance fraud, financial fraud, and disability benefit fraud. How is he taking it?" "He's demanding to call his wife to come bail him out." "Should I tell him you're unavailable?" I smiled. "Tell him his free servant has quit." 3 days later, when Robert finally made bail using money from his hidden accounts, he came home to find the locks changed and a notice that the house was being seized as part of the fraud investigation. Everything he'd built through lies was crumbling, and I was the one who'd lit the match. But this was still just the beginning of his downfall. The real devastation was yet to come. 6 months after Robert's sentencing, I was standing in a small art gallery in Minneapolis, hanging my first solo exhibition in 15 years. It wasn't a famous gallery or a prestigious show, but it was mine. The paintings were all from the past year, raw, emotional pieces I'd created while processing everything that had happened. Dark canvases that gradually gave way to lighter, more hopeful images. I called the series Invisible Woman. "Maggie, these are powerful," said Elena Vasquez, the gallery owner who'd agreed to show my work. "They tell a complete story. They're my story. I know. That's what makes them so compelling." Elena was a survivor herself, a woman who'd left an abusive marriage and built a new life in the art world. She understood what it meant to start over. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Being an artist again?" I considered the question seriously. The woman who'd once taught high school art classes felt like a different person from the woman hanging paintings in a professional gallery. "Like remembering how to breathe," I said finally. The opening reception was small but meaningful. Beth flew in from Chicago. Sarah and Michael came with their families. Even Dr. Chen attended, along with some of the women from the support group I'd started attending. But the most unexpected guest was Linda, Robert's former girlfriend. "I hope it's okay that I came," she said nervously. I wanted to apologize." "You don't need to apologize for anything." "I do, though. I was part of what he did to you, even if I didn't know it." Linda had been devastated when she learned the truth about Robert, not just because she'd been deceived, but because she realized she'd been an unwitting accomplice in my abuse. "He showed me pictures of you," she continued, "but he always said you were his bitter ex-wife who couldn't accept that he'd moved on. You never imagined he was still married to me and lying about being disabled? God, when you put it like that, it sounds insane." It was insane, but that's what made it work. Who would believe something that crazy? Linda stayed for the entire reception, and we ended up talking for hours about Robert's manipulation tactics. She'd experienced them too, just from the other side. He was always testing me, she realized as we talked, always pushing to see how much I'd tolerate, how far he could go. That's what abusers do. They find your limits and then slowly expand them until you don't remember where your boundaries used to be. The exhibition ran for 6 weeks and sold better than anyone expected. But more importantly, it started conversations. Women would come to the gallery and stand in front of my paintings for long periods, clearly seeing something that resonated with their own experiences. One afternoon, a woman in her 40s approached me while I was at the gallery. "Are you the artist?" she asked. "I am. I need to ask you something, and I hope this isn't too personal. But how did you know? How did you know it was time to leave?" I studied her face, seeing the confusion and pain I recognized from my own journey. "I didn't know," I said honestly. "I just reached a point where staying felt more dangerous than leaving. My husband isn't physically abusive," she said quietly. "But he makes me feel like I'm crazy all the time, like I can't trust my own perceptions. That's called gaslighting, and it's a form of abuse." She started crying then, and I sat with her in the gallery while she told me about her own situation. The constant criticism, the isolation from friends and family, the way her husband made her doubt her own memory of events. "But he's not like your husband," she said. "He's not pretending to be disabled or anything extreme like that." "Abuse doesn't have to be extreme to be real," I told her. "If someone is deliberately making you question your sanity, that's abuse." That conversation led to more conversations. Women started reaching out through the gallery, sharing their own stories and asking for advice. I began speaking at support groups and women's shelters, not as an expert, but as someone who'd walked the path and could offer hope. The hardest part, I would tell audiences, isn't recognizing the abuse. It's believing you deserve better. 3 months after the exhibition opened, I got a call that would change everything. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Janet Walsh from the Domestic Violence Resource Center. We've been following your story, and we have a proposition for you." The Resource Center wanted to hire me to develop an art therapy program for abuse survivors. It would mean regular income, health insurance, and the chance to use my experience to help other women. "We know you don't have formal credentials in art therapy," Janet explained, "but you have something more valuable, lived experience, and the ability to translate that into art." I took the job. Working with other survivors was both heartbreaking and healing. These women came to my workshops carrying years of pain and self-doubt, convinced they were worthless and broken. "I can't draw," was always the first thing they'd say. "This isn't about drawing," I'd reply. "It's about putting your feelings somewhere outside yourself so you can look at them." Week after week, I watched women who'd been told they were stupid and talentless create beautiful, meaningful art. They painted their anger, their fear, their hope. They sculpted their dreams and sketched their futures. But most importantly, they remembered they were creative, capable human beings. One evening, as I was cleaning up after a workshop, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson? This is Detective Martinez with the Minneapolis Police Department. I'm calling about Robert Thompson." My blood went cold. "What about him?" "He's been arrested again. We found evidence that he's been running similar scams on other women while he was supposed to be in prison." "What do you mean?" "It appears he was released early for good behavior, and he immediately started targeting vulnerable women through online support groups. He's been posing as a disabled veteran and bilking women out of money and care." I felt sick. "How many women?" "At least 4 that we know of, possibly more." "Are they okay?" "Physically, yes. Emotionally, well, you know what that's like." I did know, and I knew something else. Those women would need help healing from what Robert had done to them. "Detective Martinez, when you're ready to press charges, I'd like to testify." And I'd like to help connect these women with support resources. I was hoping you'd say that. 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from 3 other women in a conference room at the police station, listening to stories that were heartbreakingly familiar. These were the other victims Robert had been manipulating simultaneously. The investigators had tracked them down as part of building the case against him, and they'd all agreed to testify. Robert had refined his technique with each woman. He was smoother, more convincing, more careful about covering his tracks. But the damage was the same. Women who'd given everything to care for someone who saw them as nothing more than resources to be exploited. "How do we move forward from this?" one of them asked. "How do we trust anyone again?" "You start by trusting yourself," I said. "That's the hardest part, but it's the most important." That day, I made a decision that would define the next chapter of my life. I was going to make sure Robert never had the chance to hurt another woman. But first, I was going to help these women remember who they were before he tried to destroy them. Robert's second trial was different from the first. This time, he wasn't the sympathetic disabled victim. He was a repeat offender with a clear pattern of predatory behavior. The 4 women he'd victimized testified about his methods, how he'd found them through grief support groups and dating sites for older adults, how he'd presented himself as a disabled veteran needing companionship, how he'd gradually moved in with them and taken control of their finances and social connections. "He told me I was the first person who really understood what he'd been through," testified Maria Santos, a 62-year-old widow. "He said his ex-wife had been cruel to him during his recovery." "Did he ask you for financial help?" the prosecutor asked. "Not directly at first, but he needed help with medical bills, then rent, then his car payment. Before I knew it, I was supporting him completely." "How long did this relationship last?" 8 months. "Until I came home early from work one day and found him loading my jewelry into his car." Robert's pattern was consistent across all 4 victims. He targeted women who were emotionally vulnerable, recent widows, divorcees, women who were isolated or lonely. He presented himself as someone who needed care, then gradually took control of their lives. But this time, Robert had made a crucial mistake. One of his victims, Dr. Patricia Williams, was a retired psychiatrist who recognized the manipulation tactics and had started documenting everything from the beginning. "I suspected something was wrong early in our relationship," Dr. Williams testified. "Robert's stories about his disabilities were inconsistent, and his behavior didn't match his alleged psychological trauma. What did you do?" "I started keeping detailed notes and recording our conversations. When I confronted him about the inconsistencies, he became aggressive and threatening." Dr. Williams had recorded Robert admitting to his deceptions and bragging about his success with gullible women. "I've got this figured out," Robert's voice played in the courtroom. "Find women who think they can save someone, let them think they're helping a wounded hero, and they'll give you everything they have." The recordings were devastating. Robert laughed about his victims' compassion, called them stupid and desperate, and described his techniques for manipulation in clinical detail. But the prosecution's star witness was me. I testified about Robert's 5-year campaign of abuse, the psychological tactics he'd used, and the systematic way he'd destroyed my sense of reality. "Mrs. Thompson," the prosecutor asked, "in your opinion, is Mr. Thompson capable of genuine reform?" "No," I said without hesitation. "Robert sees other people as objects to be used. He doesn't understand empathy, only exploitation." "How can you be so certain?" "Because even now, even after being caught and convicted, he's continued the same behavior. This isn't someone who made a mistake. This is someone whose entire identity is built on manipulating others." Robert's defense lawyer tried to paint him as someone who'd been genuinely disabled and had only started lying after experiencing rejection and discrimination. "My client's initial deceptions grew out of real trauma and frustration," the lawyer argued. "What started as self-preservation became a pattern of behavior he couldn't break." But the evidence was overwhelming. Medical experts testified that Robert had never been as disabled as he claimed. Financial experts documented years of fraud. Psychological experts explained his pattern of predatory behavior. The jury took 6 hours to find him guilty on all counts. This time, Robert was sentenced to 12 years in prison with no possibility of early parole. But for me, the real victory wasn't the sentence. It was what happened next. The 4 women Robert had victimized asked if they could join the art therapy program I was running. They wanted to work through their trauma alongside other survivors. "I feel so stupid," Maria said during her first session. "How did I let this happen?" "You didn't let anything happen," I told her. "Why?" "Someone who was skilled at manipulation targeted you. That's not your fault." But I should have seen the signs. The signs are only obvious in retrospect. When you're in the middle of it, when someone is systematically destroying your ability to trust yourself, you can't see clearly. Dr. Williams, despite her professional background, struggled with the same self-blame. "I'm a psychiatrist," she said. "I should have recognized what he was doing." "Professional knowledge doesn't make you immune to emotional manipulation," I replied. "If anything, people like Robert are drawn to intelligent, successful women because they present a bigger challenge." Over the months that followed, I watched these women transform. They painted their anger, sculpted their strength, and slowly rebuilt their sense of self-worth. But the most meaningful moment came 6 months after Robert's sentencing. I was teaching a workshop when a young woman I didn't recognize walked into the gallery. "Excuse me, are you Maggie Thompson?" "I am." "My name is Jessica. I saw your story on the news, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For helping me realize I wasn't crazy. My boyfriend has been, well, he's been doing some of the same things you described, making me question my memory, isolating me from friends, controlling our money." "How old are you, Jessica?" 26. She was young enough to be my daughter, and she was trapped in the same kind of relationship I'd endured for 5 years. "What made you realize what was happening?" "I saw an interview you did about psychological abuse. You described how your husband made you doubt your own perceptions, and I realized that's exactly what Mark does to me." "What are you going to do?" "I left him last week. I'm staying with my sister while I figure things out." That conversation reminded me why I'd decided to speak publicly about my experience. It wasn't just about getting justice for myself. It was about helping other women recognize abuse before it destroyed their lives. After Jessica left, I called the local domestic violence hotline. "I'd like to volunteer," I told them. "I want to help train your counselors to recognize psychological abuse." "What kind of experience do you have?" "I lived through it, and I learned how to fight back." 6 months later, I was leading training sessions for domestic violence counselors, teaching them to recognize the subtle signs of psychological abuse that too often get overlooked. "Physical abuse is obvious," I would tell them, "but psychological abuse is designed to be invisible. The victim often doesn't even recognize it themselves." I developed a checklist of warning signs: isolation from friends and family, control of finances, constant criticism disguised as concern, gaslighting, and the systematic destruction of the victim's self-confidence. Most importantly, I would tell the counselors, believe victims when they say something feels wrong, even if they can't articulate exactly what it is. 1 year after Robert's final sentencing, I received an unexpected honor. The State Attorney General's office asked me to speak at a conference on elder abuse and financial fraud, not as a victim, but as an expert on psychological manipulation. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience of law enforcement officers, social workers, and legal professionals, I realized how far I'd traveled. 5 years earlier, I'd been Robert's invisible servant, doubting my own perceptions and believing I deserved nothing better. Now I was someone whose voice mattered, whose experience had value, whose story could protect other women. Psychological abuse, I told the audience, is designed to make victims disappear while they're still alive. The abuser's goal is to erase the victim's sense of self until they exist only to serve someone else's needs. But here's what abusers don't understand. They can make you invisible, but they can't make you gone. And once you remember you exist, once you remember you matter, their power over you is broken. After my speech, a young prosecutor approached me. "Mrs. Thompson, I have a case I'd like to discuss with you. We're prosecuting a man who's been financially and emotionally abusing his elderly mother. Would you consider consulting on the case?" Of course. As I drove home that night, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years of abuse had led to 2 years of fighting back, which had led to a new career helping other people fight back. Robert had tried to erase me, but instead he'd helped me discover who I really was. Someone who couldn't be erased, someone who refused to stay invisible, someone who'd turned her worst experience into her greatest strength. 3 years later, I'm sitting in my small apartment, writing an article for a local magazine about recognizing psychological abuse. It's not a best-selling book or a national platform, but it's my voice, and people are listening. The art therapy program I helped develop now operates in 3 local shelters. I speak regularly at support groups and occasionally at regional conferences. It's steady, meaningful work that pays the bills and feeds my soul. But the work that matters most to me happens every Tuesday evening in a community center room, where I lead an art therapy group for women who are rebuilding their lives after abuse. "I can't paint," said Carmen, a new member of our group last week. She was 43, Recently divorced from a man who'd convinced her she was worthless for 15 years. This isn't about painting, I told her, handing her a brush. It's about remembering you exist. By the end of the session, Carmen had created a small canvas covered in bold, angry red strokes. It wasn't technically proficient, but it was honest and powerful. I haven't felt this, present, in years, she said, staring at her work. That's what we're here for, to help each other become visible again. I still think about Robert sometimes, usually when I'm working with women who've experienced similar manipulation. He was sentenced to 8 years and will be eligible for parole in 3 more years. Sometimes I wonder if he's learned anything during his incarceration, if he's developed any genuine understanding of the damage he caused. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. He's not part of my story anymore. He's just a chapter I survived. My relationship with Sarah and Michael has been slowly rebuilding. They carry guilt about the years they didn't support me, and I carry some hurt about how quickly they believed Robert's lies. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, Mom, Sarah told me recently during one of our monthly coffee dates. I thought I was being objective, but I was just being blind. You weren't equipped to see sophisticated manipulation, I replied. That's not your fault. Michael brings his kids to visit every few months. My grandchildren, now 12 and 10, love hearing stories about their grandmother, the artist who helps people. They don't know the full story yet. That's for when they're older. The most unexpected development in my life has been my friendship with Dr. Patricia Williams, one of Robert's other victims who attended my court trial and reached out afterward. Patricia understands the unique trauma of being manipulated by someone like Robert in a way that even other abuse survivors sometimes don't. We've become each other's reality checks, helping each other trust our own perceptions and judgment. Do you ever miss being needed? Patricia asked me over coffee last week. Not by Robert, but that feeling of being essential to someone? It was a good question. There had been something seductive about being Robert's caregiver, about believing I was indispensable. I miss feeling useful, I said, but I've learned the difference between being needed and being used. What's the difference? When someone needs you, they're grateful. When someone uses you, they're entitled. Now I'm needed by the women in my therapy groups, by the organizations that ask me to speak, by the journalists who want to understand psychological abuse. But it's a healthy kind of need. They value my insights and experience, but they don't expect me to disappear into their service. Last month, I received a letter that reminded me why this work matters. Dear Ms. Thompson, I saw your story in the local paper last year. At the time, I was in a relationship that I thought was just difficult, but after reading about your experience, I realized it was abusive. It took me 6 more months to leave, but I wanted you to know that I'm now free and starting over. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to save your own life. Jessica. I keep that letter on my desk as a reminder of why I chose to make my pain public, why I decided to turn my worst experience into something that could help others. Tonight, I'm going to do something just for me. I'm going to paint, not for an exhibition or a therapy session or to make a point about survival. Just because I love creating beautiful things, and I remember now that I was always an artist, the canvas is waiting on my easel, blank and full of possibilities, like my life. As I clean my brushes and prepare to start, I catch sight of myself in the studio window. The woman looking back at me has silver hair that catches the light, paint-stained fingers, and eyes that are clear and bright with purpose. She looks like someone who knows exactly who she is. She looks like someone who would never again accept being invisible. She looks like someone who remembers she was always meant to create beautiful things and help other people remember the same about themselves. She looks like someone who saved her own life and then used that experience to help others save theirs. She looks like me, and I am enough. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.